Today's program is part of the Profiles in Literature series, featuring interviews with persons prominent in American literature for children. The moderator of this series is Dr. Jaqueline Shachter Weiss.
Today's guest is author-illustrator Tomie dePaola. We appreciate your flying from New Hampshire, especially for this program, and welcome you to Profiles in Literature.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm delighted to be here.
Joining us is your longtime friend, Carolyn Field, my colleague on the Profiles series and coordinator emeritus of the Office on Work with Children of the Free Library of Philadelphia.
So glad you're here in Philadelphia again, Tomie.
Thank you, Carolyn.
It's great to see you, and I hear that you moved from Wilmot Flats to New London.
Right.
And why did you move from that lovely home that you had?
Well, I really wanted a little more privacy, and the old house was right on the main street of the small village of Wilmot Flat, and I bought a beautiful old farm, actually a farm, in New London. Outside of it, it has 15 acres, a lot more privacy, and a lot of things to keep me busy for the next few years.
I'll bet. Well, we have some pictures of you and the farm
Right.
and the house, and if you'll tell us a little bit about each.
Sure, be happy to. There I am looking at some of my quilts. I have a very nice collection of antique quilts, and I think I was getting ready to decide which one was going to go on a bed in the guest room.
You use those in the books.
Yeah, I've done quilt designs around the borders in Night Before Christmas, and I love American folk art, so that's part of my collection of American folk art.
Next.
There I am in my studio working on a book, which is where you'll find me most of the time, and that's kind of a nice studio. It's got a little, garret window, so when I walk into it, I always think of Paris or something
looks
instead
like
of New
Paris.
Hampshire. Right.
Next.
There I am in the living room, and right next to me on the sofa is a wonderful needlepoint pillow made by a very dear friend of mine who's sitting right next to me.
But designed by you.
Yes, right, and you gave that to me as a gift the day I received the Regina Medal in Washington, D.C. several years ago. And in my arms in the shadows is my 14-year-old Abyssinian cat, Sati.
Next.
There I'm in the dining room. And that's a very important room in the house for me because I love to entertain and I love to cook. And I'm setting the table with some antique dishes. I think you can see that I really love antiques. And those dishes came from my great-grandmother.
What's your favorite food to cook?
Well, I like to cook just about everything, but because of my Italian heritage, I make pretty good homemade pasta, especially pasta primavera or pasta with veal and Marsala wine.
Oh, delicious. Next.
Oh, and there's the new member of the household. That's Baby Bingley. He's a baby Airedale puppy. When this picture was taken, he was just about 3.5 weeks old. His paws are the size of dinner plates, but he's doing quite well. So everyone's taking bets in New York to when he's going to appear in a book.
Like Sati
Like
did.
Sati, right.
Next.
And that's a nice view of the whole complex of buildings. Taken from the back meadow, which is, I think that back meadow is going to be the eventual site of a swimming pool, I hope, if my work keeps on going so well. And you can see the house and the shed and the barn. And in New England, we have this connected architecture. It's called continuous architecture.
I understand that the shed will become your permanent studio.
Right, right.
It's in a studio setting that Mr. dePaola created the books that won him the Regina Medal in 1983 from the Catholic Library Association. Here we see a replica of it. Mr. dePaola is the youngest person to win that honor yet. It's given for the body of his work. But didn't one fan misinterpret and think you were giving it for your body?
Yeah, that's right. Someone said, "For your body?"
Oh.
And that was a great moment for me.
I'm sure.
A great moment for me.
Well, there could be no misinterpretation when one of your books was a Caldecott Honor book in 1976.
Right.
What book was that?
That was Stragonona, the first Stragonona, and that's my own retelling of the classical folktale about the porridge pot. It's a very classical subject matter in folk literature, and as you both know, I'm very vitally interested in folk literature. And the classic tale is one of the magic, the person with the magic, and the apprentice or the servant that wants to grab that magic or use that magic, but without paying attention or without using it properly.
What Italian ingredient did you add?
I added pasta.
And what original feminist character did you incorporate?
Well, into well, Stregonona herself, and
course.
she's a little bit based on my Italian grandmother.
I see.
And what's interesting about Stregonona is that I think she has so much of the mythic and collective unconscious qualities of the folk heroine that someone came up to me after that book was published and said, "Oh, thank goodness someone's finally doing the Stregonona tales." And I said, I didn't know there were Stregonona tales because I had invented her.
Of course.
But that makes a nice compliment, I think.
What is the primary theme of Stregonona?
I think the primary theme is the one of comedic, the comedic theme of the servant who gets himself or herself into trouble by fiddling around with magic.
I see.
And if you look in folk literature, you'll see that that theme is in
Recurs.
every culture, every culture. Why the Sea is Salt, the rice bowl in India and China, the porridge pot in Anglo-Saxon literature.
Well, that's true in the your three books, that your Big Anthony is the humorous
Oh, yeah.
character
Right.
in it.
Right.
What medium did you use for illustrating them?
Well, Carolyn, I use a variety of media, and what I always do is I use the medium that will reproduce the best. When I'm doing work for my own one-man shows or for paintings to hang on the wall, then the medium becomes a little bit more important because that's what you see. But the important thing about doing work for books is that it must reproduce properly. So I used, for those particular books, I used transparent watercolors and transparent colored inks. And I like the colored inks because I can build up color and get a depth of color, and as I said, it reproduces very, very well.
Well, in some of your books, you do tell of the medium and
Right.
the paper and
Right.
so on.
Right.
Have you ever thought of having it put in all your books, since you do care about what you use?
Well, I think I'm putting it in every one now,
Are
if there's
you?
room.
Good.
Yeah, there isn't always room, but that's called a colophon. And actually, I really argued with some of my editors about putting that in. They said, "Oh, no, nobody would be interested in that." But I think it's
Oh,
just
yes,
the
they are.
opposite, just the opposite.
Librarians
Even,
and teachers
children.
and children.
And children.
Absolutely, are always interested.
Always interested.
What about full color reproduction? Do you always have full color reproduction?
No,
Or do you have to-
I had to pay my dues. And I've been doing books for, it'll be 20 years this coming year. And my first books, I've done over 100 books, so my first books were done in what's called pre-separated art. That's where I
yeah.
have to do overlays. But I think Stregonona was my second full-color book. And that was back in 1975 that I did that artwork.
Well, now they're all full color.
Yes,
Yeah.
almost. Occasionally, I will choose not to do a book in full color, only because it's like, well, let's just say it's like film. I think some films would not benefit at all from being in color. If you remember the old black and white film, I mean, can you imagine Casablanca in color? I can't. You know, it's those beautiful grays and silvery tones. And I think some books don't warrant the expense of full color because full color is very expensive.
Right.
So recently I did Now One Foot, Now the Other, and that was in limited color. But I felt that was appropriate for the story.
You do border designs for some of your books, like the quilt design for The Night Before Christmas and the gingerbread border for Helga's Dowry, A Troll Love Story, and Irish jewelry and metalwork designs around text in Finn McCool, The Giant of Knockmany Hill. Those last two books have strong female characters,
Yes,
good
they do.
role models. What's the primary theme of Helga's Dowry?
Well, Helga is written in the style of a folktale, Jackie, and it's a totally original story. And I got interested in trolls because I noticed they were appearing in my doodles. So I did some research on trolls and found out that each Scandinavian country had a little bit different kind of troll living in it. So Helga is pretty much a Norwegian troll. I would say that the primary theme of Helga is the business of, all right, it's sort of a reverse Cinderella story. Cinderella kind of sits around and waits for the fairy godmother to come and make the magic. Helga's just the opposite. She makes her own magic and is sort of the master of her own self. Now, it's very interesting. When I read Cirentola, which is the Italian Cinderella, and there's some indication that it maybe predates the Pierrot Cinderella. Cinderella does not rely totally on the fairy godmother. It's fascinating because she takes the glass slipper off her foot and leaves it for the prince to find. And I was fascinated to see that was in a theme. Right.
Your jewelry designs for Finn McCool suggest artistry beyond book illustration. Name some of your non-illustration projects.
Well, before I did my first book, I showed in a gallery. And I still continue to have one-man shows of paintings and drawings. I don't have them as frequently as I would like to because I'm so busy doing books. But several years ago, I was able to do, I was asked to do the cover for the Neiman Marcus Christmas book. They don't like to call it a catalog. And because of that, they took some of those designs and translated them into other merchandise, such as cookie tins and glasses with the design taken from the
here it is,
jacket.
right here.
And I just received a huge carton of things. That's the only thing I can call them, is things from Japan. There's one company over there that is starting to merchandise some of my characters, and I have a box full of stuff. You'll have to come visit and see all that.
You mean like
stuff.
dolls? And
No,
things
not
like that,
dolls,
or,
but plates
plates?
and music
Oh.
boxes and futon cover. There's a futon
Oh,
cover
for
in there.
heaven's
Towels
Too much.
and washcloths. And it's
Too much.
and actually I'm exploring that area a little bit more.
I see.
It's a kind of a nice adjunct to the book.
Well, you've also
business.
done magazine covers.
Yes.
And lots of posters. We
Lots
have
of
some
posters.
here
Lots of posters.
to show.
Those posters are lovely.
And they're for various things. Some of them are, some of the posters are promotional for the books themselves. Then there's a poster up there that's for Book Week, which is done by the Children's Book Council. And there's also a poster of a cover I was asked to do for the American Bookseller.
Yes,
And-
excellent.
And that was kind of an interesting cover because they said, oh, it's lovely. And why is there a lion and a lamb in it? I said, well, because you asked me to do the cover for March.
I see.
And
That's appropriate. You know, I wanted to ask you if you are a workaholic because you produce so much. Discuss your weekday lengths, workday lengths, and weekends, vacations.
Well, I plead guilty. I am a workaholic, Jackie, and my workday was a little different than it is right at the moment. Now I'm into Nautilus exercise, so that's kind of fun. So 3 days a week I go to a health club, and I take a long walk every morning after breakfast. But I will be at work by 10 o'clock at the latest, and I'll work through till like noontime. Then I'll stop and take a lunch break, and then I'll go back to work and work until 4:30, 5 o'clock. Then I'll take a dinner break, and maybe we'll even have a cocktail if it's appropriate for visitors, etc. And I'll be back upstairs working in my studio by 9 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and work maybe until midnight. And I do that about 7 days a week. I have learned recently, though, I did take a little time off, and I had a vacation, and I didn't know what that was. And I've got everybody nervous in New York now because I sort of liked it.
Oh, but as a result of all this work, how many books have you created?
You know, I don't have an actual count, but it's over 140 that I've illustrated, and over 40 that I've written the text for.
That's tremendous.
And I'm going to be 50 soon, and as I told you, know, I feel like I've just gotten started, so we don't know what's going to come in the future.
Wonderful. But your talents are not limited to the drawing table. Tell us about your first solo in church when you were only 3 years old.
You've done your homework. Well, I sang on the good ship Lollipop in the church. I joined in singing when the children were singing, and the priest said, "Now, little boy, if you'll let the children sing because they practiced, when they're finished, I'll let you sing." And my mother was trying to give the priest the high sign. No, don't do that. And I got up on the altar, and he said, "Now, what would you like to sing?" And I said, "On the good ship Lollipop." And fortunately, the organist knew it.
Oh, my.
So So he had this rousing rendition.
I'm told you did it with gestures,
Oh,
Shirley
I'm sure.
Temple
I'm sure I
style.
did, right.
And from that high point, you became a tap dancer,
Yeah.
as we will see
Right.
in these illustrations of you as a child from Oliver Button is a Sissy,
Right.
your autobiographical study of a young nonconformist.
Right.
Were your actual parents as supportive as the book parents?
Yes, they were, especially with the pizza business after being in a show. The my father was very concerned. Of course, you know, we're talking about 40s right now, 1940s, and my father was very concerned that I wasn't out playing ball and all this and that. But I took tap dancing lessons for 14 years, and I might say that I was quite good. And I should have brought my shoes with me, right?
Right. Done a rendition.
Right.
6 years before Oliver Button, in 1973, you published your first self-written book, Nana Upstairs and Nana Downstairs. Here we see the frontispiece of you as a boy of 4 with your grandmother and 94-year-old great-grandmother.
Right.
What's the primary theme of Nana?
Well, what drove me to write that book was that my great-grandmother was my best friend, and I became very aware more and more each year that the very, very young and the very, very old are kind of pariahs in our society. You know, they're young children are kind of like, you know, be nice, behave. Old people are kind of shut away. Now, my great-grandmother wasn't shut away. She was in my grandmother's home. And as a young child, as a 4-year-old, she was my very best friend. Now, that book has gotten a lot of notice and a lot of notoriety because it deals with the subject of death. But I think that the primary theme of that book is the very special relationship that exists between the very, very old and the very, very young. And in that relationship, that special relationship, death is pretty much inevitable when a person is quite old. I also think that it's a shame that in our society there aren't more great-grandparents and grandparents living in the homes, because the things I found out from my great-grandmother especially, you know, I didn't put it in the book, but she taught me how to read tea leaves at 4 years old, and I didn't tell anybody until I was about 25 that I could read tea leaves. And we had a great time together. And so the book is really also a celebration of her. And then I did a book about my Italian grandparents as well, grandmother, because I didn't know my grandfather. And I did that because I woke up in a cold sweat one night, and I had had a terrible dream of my Italian grandmother standing on the porch, and she called me to her. She said, "Come here." And I walked over, and I said, "Yes, Nana." And she said, "How come you no write a book about me?" So the minute I woke up, I thought, I'll write one, Nana, I'll write one. And that's watch out for the chicken feet in your soup.
I know.
Well, Nana actually was the first time that you made an effort to discover the child within,
Yes, right.
in fantasies and dreams,
Right.
rather than just memories.
Right.
And I think that's fascinating. Now, with the other book is Watch Out for the Chicken Feet in Your Soup with your Italian grandmother.
Right.
That again is right. Now, do you have any personal reason why you made this change with the Nana book?
Oh, yeah. Yes, Carolyn, because I was living in San Francisco, and I was beginning to feel very ineffective. Things were going pretty well for me. I was doing more books. I was teaching. I taught for 20 years to support my habit of being able to do books. And I went into therapy, as many people did during the 60s, as the middle 60s, and I was in a group. And the therapist that I worked with was a very, very interesting woman, well, still is a very interesting woman. She had me pay her with a drawing a week. And after about 6 months, in one of the sessions, she put out all the drawings that I had brought in and laid them out on the floor, and the recurring theme that ran through them was so obvious that I was not aware of. But when I saw it there, so obviously for me as the artist, the things that were coming up out of my unconscious were manifesting themselves in my art before I was aware of them in my conscious. And in all of those drawings, there was a young child trying to get out of something. And I realized that why I wasn't effective any longer was because I wasn't behaving like I did when I was a little child. And I was a terrible child. I mean, I knew exactly what I wanted. because by the age of 4, I knew that I wanted to do books. And you know, write. I said I wanted to draw pictures and write stories for books, and sing and tap dance on the stage. And so then the interesting thing of trying to get that child to come out of the closet, and he said, "No, thank you. I'm very happy in here. You struggle on by yourself. I'm having a lovely time in here." But finally, through a lot of different exercises, I was able to get back in touch. And people ask me, because I'm not married and I don't have children, and a lot of people say, "How can you write for children?" And the answer for me is very simple. I just draw on my own memory. I go inside, and actually that's the critic in me that says, all right, would you like this as a child? Would you have been interested in this? So.
You also spent a short time in the Benedictine monastery, didn't you?
On several occasions.
Several occasions.
I went in and out, in and out, in and out.
Well, didn't you, at that time, did you decide to do an annual Christmas book?
Well, I don't think it was then that I decided. You know, I decided a lot of things before I was allowed to do them, of course. But I think that when I finally got more or less established in the field, that I think the publishers noticed that my Christmas books were really, that I have a special feeling for Christmas. I love Christmas. Oh, I just decorate the house, you know, from top to bottom. And I do try to do a Christmas book every year. And next year I will not be in 1985, so I shouldn't say next year because you know, you might be watching this in 1986. But in 1985 I won't be doing a Christmas book per se, but it will be a big Christmas type book. I'm doing a full Mother Goose.
Oh, that will be lovely.
So that'll be that's exciting.
Now you have, I noticed, a number of publishers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who are your main publishers? Which ones
They'd
would you
even
call
like
your
to know.
main?
Are they all watching?
They all main. They're all main.
I have 3 main publishers now, and that all happened accidentally, and I suddenly found myself with more than one publisher, and because editors would leave one publishing house and go to another, and I'd be doing a project with the house that they were at, but then they'd want me to do a project at the new house. But the three main publishers are Putnam and Sons, Holiday House, and HBJ, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. And then I do work for other publishers as well when I have time. I've illustrated books for Phyllis Fogelman at Dial. I'm doing a little series of Bible cutout books for a press called Winston Press in
I've seen that.
Minneapolis.
That's fascinating.
And but the 3 main houses. And what's nice is that now I've been able to keep them all separate, which has been a trick. I'll tell you. I did the Clown of God about the juggler, and I've had to do some juggling myself. But I really do seem to have very specific projects that fit into the scheme of each one of those publishers.
There were 4 of them at your Regina Medal.
Yes,
remember that?
right,
So you
right.
better say you had 4 major publishers.
Well,
And they all get along, which is
this
nice.
is unusual.
Yes, it is.
Let's
Yes, it
cite
is.
that, and you are a juggler. But I'd like to know what suggestions you would pass on to people who teach children's literature courses to make improvements in them, to improve them for teachers and librarians. What ideas?
I guess I wish that a little more time and maybe I don't know how to explain it in you know, politely here, but some more knowledge about the art in the books would be very valuable, I think. And that's what I think is very lacking in the courses in children's literature that are being taught. Much time and valuable time is spent on the text, and the teachers we certainly have some of the most qualified people in the world teaching children's literature in this country. But I think that we fall short on really good knowledge and good information about the art. Because just because it's an illustration for a children's book does not remove it from the world of, quote, real art.
Right.
And I think you'd find that in the people who illustrate children's books, that they really do consider themselves artists who are using their talent or their creativity in the service of children and young people.
Absolutely. Do you consider yourself primarily an author or illustrator?
Artist.
Okay.
Artist author is how I like to refer to myself.
Okay. And let me ask you, why do you give so much attention to the sound of words in your text?
Well, Jackie, I was read aloud too as a child. So when I get down to the final draft of my own stories, I tape them and I read them aloud so that they sound right, because I still think that all we people who do children's books are, we're just the storytellers of old. We're just using a different media.
Exactly.
And I still think that the best story is one that can be read aloud,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the length of the book. If you haven't tried it, try reading aloud Jean Fritz's books about her childhood in China. The sound of the words are so beautiful. Lloyd Alexander, the sounds of his words are so wonderful.
Meant to be read aloud.
Right. And I think any good book, even if it's for an adult, if it's a good book, it sounds good being read aloud.
Absolutely.
Well, I think this is true of all outstanding author illustrators of children's books. You do have some good relationships with some of our top ones, such as Anita and Arnold Lobel,
Yes,
right?
right.
Can you tell us something about
Well,
your relationship
I
with
went
them?
to school with them. Yeah.
Did you
Yeah, I
really?
went to art
Oh.
school with them. And Arnold was 1 year ahead of me, Anita was 1 year behind me, and we were all in the theater group together. But somehow or other, Anita and I always got to play husband and wife on stage, which was strange because I was short, and shorter than Anita. But in fact, there were several other people that went to Pratt with me as well. Cindy Zekaris, Charles Mikolajczyk, Ted Lewin. We were all at Pratt at the same time. So
Well,
they must have done something right there.
They did, because they're tops now, too.
Right.
Another person who has the same child within him in relation to his books is Maurice Sendak. Now, you, I'm sure, know him very well.
I don't say very well, Carolyn, but I do consider Maurice a friend. And I guess that means that when I call up, he answers the phone. We did get together one time when I was visiting him in his home, and we discussed our childhood, and we had very different kinds of childhood. I think mine was a little happier than his, and maybe that shows in our different approaches. But I think that he also has dug deep to keep in touch with the child inside himself.
He's the child inside
Right,
coming out
right,
always, and I
right.
think, and of course he isn't married either, so that
Maybe there's
it's the
something to
same.
that, yeah.
You both have a chance to bring the child out. You said you liked fairy tales and folk tales
Yes,
and so
yeah.
on. What other books did you like when you were growing up?
I love to read the encyclopedia.
Oh.
I used to sit and read the encyclopedia. I guess that's why I like doing information books as well as folk
Like the
tales.
And you
Quicksand
liked,
book.
Quicksand book.
you liked Beatrix Potter, too,
Oh, I
didn't
loved her,
you?
of course, of course. I mean, if anyone doesn't like Beatrix Potter, then I don't think they have any taste.
And which of your books has been translated into 10 languages and adapted for the stage?
The Clown of God. In fact, it's up to 13 languages now.
Oh,
because
my.
3 more countries just took it for translation. And the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis has done the first full stage production of it. And there'll be a couple of other smaller productions done as well of that particular piece.
That was one of my favorite stories to tell when I was a children's librarian.
Good.
Thank you very much. Tomie dePaola, thespian, professor, and artist author of children's books that are often stylized. In the Reading Teacher's 1978 poll, children listed 4 dePaola books as their favorites, more than for anyone else. That's because he gives his best when he introduces youngsters to the human visual world. May you have a long, creative life.
Thank you, Jackie. It was such a pleasure to be here with you. You too. Great.